7:15. All right, Wade, let's go. I got you. It's Chris. Thank you so much for everybody for being here. If you're visiting with us, thank you so much for being here. This is a class that we're doing this quarter. Excuse me. It's gonna be a rough night. Talking about challenges that our kids face, and I have several kids, so I'm right here in the middle of it. There's a lot of people here, most people that are way more experienced than I am, and I appreciate any thoughts that you might have, especially from the Word of God, that we might have to learn how to shepherd our children through this. So tonight we're going to be talking specifically about cares of the world. We talked about the very first class, maintaining a tender heart, starting off with the attitude. We talked about dating and modesty and sexual purity last class. And in this class we're going to be talking about cares of the world. So let me start off with this assertion tonight. And it's mainly a question for the older members, and I'll let you be the judge of if you qualify for it or not. But my assertion to you this evening is that families in our modern society are very, very, very busy. Now, for the older members among us, how do your family's schedules, or how do let's say the modern family, how does that compare to the schedules from when you were a child, your youth? Is this a wrong assertion? Is it correct? What do we think? Now is on steroids? Okay. All right. Anybody want to back him up, or is that an outlier? Yes, it's on steroids. Can you get how so? Can you give some commentary on that?
Yeah, I mean, when we were kids, we had a lot of time to go spend with grandparents. We would go to grandparents on the weekends. We weren't in sports 3 or 4 nights a week and every weekend. It just was very different culture.
Yes, sir.
I don't know what it's like today, but at least when I was growing up, we did a lot more homework. I mean, we really had a lot of work to do for school, for academic work at home, and so when you finish supper, it was time to get homework done, and you could do that all the way until the time you go to bed.
Right.
But, sports was also limited to just, at least in my family, you could do one sport basically, but it was one community sport, and it was maybe one practice a week, and you practice with your brother or with your dad or whoever outside of that. So band was different. Band wasn't so intense. It didn't seem like the music programs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else?
Even the sports programs, they were during the season.
So not a year-round.
There wasn't year-round football. There wasn't winter baseball. There wasn't all these other.
Y'all are hitting a lot of points that I've yet to get to, so we're going to be able to fly through these. Yes, ma'am. And then what?
The other thing was that Wednesday nights were sacred. Nobody had a practice on Wednesday night. Nobody had games on a Sunday morning. Those things were off limits in the world at large because.
So not just your family, but. I got it. Okay. What?
We also did have social media to make you feel like you weren't doing enough for your kids.
I got that point in here too. That's a fantastic point. Zach, do you have something? Okay. I was going to say, I don't think you're old enough. Well, just kidding. Yeah.
When I was growing up, didn't have as many entertainment things to distract. We had 3 primary television channels.
Yeah.
You didn't have YouTube, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have all these things to occupy your time, you didn't have video games, you didn't have computers, you didn't have, somebody already mentioned social media. And so there are a lot more, I don't know if you put it into the busy category, but as far as the distractions.
A lot more things to do, potential things, yeah.
The thing I find with my grandchildren now that I probably did it as a kid and I just don't remember. But if they have 5 minutes without a tablet or something else, you get in the car, 5 minutes into the trip, I'm bored.
Yeah.
We didn't have that kind of stuff to keep us occupied. You want to read a book or whatever, but there's a different level of distraction.
We're going to get into some of that with our maybe losing our ability to dwell on things, to think. We're told to dwell on good, solid, godly things. What about from a spiritual scheduling standpoint? And I didn't know where this question was going to go. How do we, yes, ma'am?
I remember going to gospel meetings all the time, and we wouldn't just go to a gospel meeting one night. We might go for the whole gospel meeting.
Not your own, to another one?
Like to a congregation in the area, and we were constantly going to singing, going to gospel meetings, things like that.
Was there a hand? Yes, ma'am.
When I was growing up, we had to stop everything at noon on Saturday, and we got ourselves bathed and our hair washed and our shoes polished, and then Mother and Daddy would sit down with us with our Bible lesson for the next day, and we would study that and review it, and then we would get up the next morning, and we were not allowed to watch TV or listen to the radio or cartoons or the newspaper, anything. You talked about spiritual things and listen to gospel music, or we sang a lot. We just actually sitting there sing books.
Oh, it's great. Is there, yeah.
Growing up, like, of course, my dad's a preacher, so that also affects things, but we went with my parents to everything, like visiting sick. I mean, we lived in the hospitals, visiting people from church, and we would go visit the widows, we'd visit people at their homes. Like, they took us everywhere. We went with them. Nothing was, you did the work together as a family.
Yeah, they didn't give you a choice, like, hey, do you want to stay here and watch your iPad or whatever? Yeah. So I'm going to thank you very much for that, because that was exactly what I was hoping. So it's kind of nervous when you ask things. You don't know what you're going to get back, but we're on the same page. So I want to kind of center our thoughts around some conceptual verses here before we kind of jump in. So there's 4 verses I want to look at, or actually 5, but there's obviously many more that might jump out to you when you're thinking about it. The first one from 2 Timothy 2:4. No one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. So it's talking about a soldier. You think of warfare and being distracted. And I have 3 Army stories or references in this class, and this is going to be one of them. Our first week deployed to Afghanistan was a government shutdown, and Congress turned off all the money going to soldiers for that event. And so soldiers weren't getting paid. And so they were getting calls from their wives saying, hey, we're not getting paid. And where's their mind at? It was chaos right when we first got there. So, that when I read this, it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. Your mind needs to be in the fight here. And so Matthew 6:24, no one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And then 2 verses, both out of 1 Corinthians, from Paul in very close proximity to each other. Slightly differences here, so humor me. But all things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. And then lastly, let us lay aside, from Hebrews 12:1, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And I think of a runner running with like a rucksack on or something. That's not fun. Take that off and you can run a lot faster. Second military reference, I don't know if, is Adam here? Have you ever done the combat water survival test? Yeah. So it's 25 meters in a pool. You jump in and you swim. Oh, it's 25 meters. You could swim that. Not very bad. But then put all your gear on. You're loaded down with your kit. You have boots on. You have a helmet. You have a rifle. And now do it. And for me, it was like drowning for 25 meters. That's just getting there. And that's that idea of laying that aside. How much easier is it on our Christian run if we aren't carrying that extra weight? So with those thoughts in mind, how can something not be sinful in and of itself, but still be something that a Christian should not partake in, or at least, maybe not all the way or fully devote themselves to? What do we think? What would be your advice? Is that a loaded question or not? What do we think? Yes, sir.
Would it be something that would be an activity, or we'll put it activity at the moment. That would take us away from doing something else that's more important. For example, a sporting event, when we should be going to services, that's when the church is meeting, and we decide to absent ourselves from the services in order to participate in a sport or school activity, function, or whatever. The sport itself in and of itself is not wrong. It's not sinful. But it may have great physical benefits, but we're missing out on the spiritual.
Right. And we're talking about wisdom also, right? Where something might not, well, show me in the Bible where it says that I have to go to Wednesday services. Like that's not the right, if those words are coming out of your mouth, there's other things there that need to be worked on. Submission, a huge one component to that. Different things. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, Kyle, go ahead.
That question makes me think about Jesus counseling that, what we call the rich young ruler.
Yeah. I saw the questions come out today. I was gonna bring that up, but sorry.
Just thinking, that the possession of these things wasn't necessarily sinful in and of itself, but it was a distraction to him from what was to be a priority.
Can anyone think of? Well, here, let me go back. Sorry. Can anyone think of any examples in the Bible where it talks about this? Off the top of my head. What about, we brought up, I believe, 1 Corinthians 7 last week, where we talk about Paul kind of recommending not getting married at this certain time because of the negative events going on in the world. If it's going to be a temptation for you, fine, get married. But I would recommend not doing that right now so you're not weighted down. Where is your priority supposed to be at in this specific time? In 1 Corinthians 7, it might be beneficial not to do that. So it's allowable, it's not sinful by any means, but might not be wise. So saw that. If anybody can think of any others.
I just keep thinking about Ephesians 5:15 about redeeming the time.
Oh yeah.
And walking circumspectly, not as fools, redeeming the time because the days are evil. We don't have an unlimited amount of time. So if we spend an inordinate amount of time on something that may seem harmless, we may be excluding and ignoring a lot of other things that deserve our time.
Yeah, you have a limited amount of opportunity here to be doing good, right? So we talked and beat up, I think rightfully so, I would submit, sports. What else? What consumes our time? It's specifically our children's time, but I mean, we're over our children, so what consumes our time as well? That's going to be negative things on them. What do we think? What consumes your time? Television? Okay. Love it. Politics? How about that? There's a lot of politics in the news right now. Dwelling on that. What else? What do we think? Social media, yeah. Good. Death scrolling, right? I had scrolling on mine. Anybody have an iPhone? Here's an exercise. Follow me for a second, okay? Go to settings on your iPhone and go down to screen time and see how much time you spend on your phone. And if you're terrified to look at it, that might be an indicator. All right, mine is 4 hours and 13 minutes, okay? That's a lot. So think about that. I won't call you out if you're looking at your phone. So do that. What about hobbies? Golf is kind of the stereotypical thing that dads like to go do. I mean, it takes an inordinate amount of time, money. It could be exercising. In our culture, hunting and fishing is a big one. Sports we talked about. It could be vacations. Stephen had mentioned academics, especially in college. I'll tell you, when I was in college, it became my habit not to go to Sunday services in the evening. That was my study time. We had a morning service and an evening service, and I justified it in my mind of like, well, I got to study. I'm super busy with my activities during the week. I go on Wednesdays, I go on Sunday mornings, and I won't go on Sunday evenings because it's kind of optional. And you know what? No one ever said anything to me about it. And I look back and I wish they would have. I wish they'd been like, hey, we noticed you're not here. What's going on? And I would have, just told them, whatever. And it would have been awesome if they would just, put their arm around me and be like, are you sure? Are you sure that's wise? And it's something, looking back when we talk about older men exhorting younger men and older women, younger women. That's the type of thing that I would have appreciated, but I didn't. Only looking backwards do I know that I could have benefited from that. So just something for your mind's eye to think about. Can anybody think of anything else before we move on? I think there's some good thoughts.
Maybe becoming indebted in society to live a certain lifestyle, and you just spend an inordinate amount of time trying to just catch up and just try to keep up with whatever you've established as your standard of living, but it's not really a standard of living that makes sense for a particular time in your life.
That's a great point.
But the debt load is just it's a source of stress, source of anxiety, maybe a second job. Those kind of things.
I'm happy you brought that up because I blew through this in the opening slide. I had on here that now, and again, tell me if let's say 1970s and below, somewhere in there, was it as common for both parents to work outside the house? I don't think it was. Let me know if I'm wrong on that. But now it's kind of the norm. Whether that's not the topic of whether or not that's wrong. It's not. You can do it, but is it because you're trying to keep some type of standard of living, whatever it might be? And it is expensive. I'm not saying like it's not. It's extremely difficult to live. I get it. It's just something to think about. Only you know your heart. So thank you for bringing that up. Let me ask you one thing, because we have a lot of, especially men and ladies as well, but men who are very, very active in our church. And so I'm very interested to see what y'all's feedback is on this. Can you be too active in church or spiritual activities? What do you think?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I think that was Ben, like an auctioneer. Ben, Chris, you raised your hand. I'll reward politeness, but then we're going to Ben.
Absolutely. I don't think it's super common. I don't think it's like super common, but I know instances where fathers have basically shirked their responsibility with their kids because they say, I'm doing this for the church. But at the same time, they don't give their kids the attention that they need.
Right. Thank you. Ben, do you have?
Well, I think it can come about in a lot of different ways. It can happen maybe even with teachers. So, for example, if a person is, with young classes, for example, it's good to, I think, probably for some of the teachers to rotate or take a break and be able to come back into the auditorium, or to take a quarter off, or even different men who may do a lot of different things. And so good works are always a good thing, but also making sure that we're careful with I think our motivation behind it, making sure, I have to do all these to earn my salvation, or to prove to other people in the congregation, when our main motivation should be seeking to please God. So maybe there are some times where we're not able to do that. I think sometimes moms may have a lot of guilt of, I can't do as much, maybe because they have a few more kids at the house. And so I think there can be a danger, and there's a balance, and plenty of people have told me, even with preaching, or men back in the 70s and maybe a little bit earlier would have 10, 12 gospel meetings in a year. So those are all good things for preaching the gospel, but potentially what expense if you're not at home and you're everywhere else.
Right, yeah, exactly. And that's such a hard thing, because it sounds, maybe it's just, like it sounds weird saying that. Like, what do you mean I shouldn't devote myself to God? Well, of course you are, but when you are married and when you're a father, you have responsibilities to your wife and to your children. And so we're going to go for the second time to 1 Corinthians 7. Let's go, if you'll turn with me, 1 Corinthians 7, starting in 32, and we're going to read 32 to 35. So I just want to make sure we hit this point. I don't know if I've ever heard it addressed, so I kind of wanted to hit it. So 1 Corinthians 7, starting in 32, Paul speaking, "But I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. There is a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. So you can't shirk your responsibilities. I think, Ben, you said that, and that's the exact word I would use. I know of an example where there was a preacher who was like the stereotypical, almost like Jonah, only, he meant well. He would go out just calling to those. He would go to bus stops. He would preach everywhere, go into supermarkets, wander the streets looking for lost souls. But he also elected to have a huge family. I'd say huge, maybe like 7 kids, okay? And his wife was there with the 7 children. And almost all of those kids, by any standard of the Bible, wouldn't be considered faithful. While he was out preaching, they were back stealing cars and that's not even kidding. Okay, that's like legit examples. What are you doing? It's like you need to take care of your house, take care of this, the beam in your own eye before you go out and try to help other people. Anyway, just a thought. One thing too, just for encouragement for our elders. I know y'all. Oh yes, sir. Go ahead.
The word that I think you need to put in here is the word balance.
Yeah.
But that's true for all of us, and it differs at different points in our lives. If when we're married, take for example the Old Testament example when the Jewish young man was married, he was free from military service for the first year of his life.
Yeah.
The first year of his marriage. Balance. When you have those children, yes, fathers need to show that attention to their children. But once those children leave the house, the balance and the attention, you need to go back and kind of renew your marriage vows with your wife and get back to that. But as things go, you're going to have more time on your hands to do other things too. And that's probably the biggest thing that we all need to learn. And I'm talking to myself here.
Of course. Thank you. And before we move on, the point I wanted to make with our elders is just encouragement to you gentlemen. I can't imagine the stress y'all under almost constantly without breaks. Like all of us, the size of this congregation, there's always something going on beneath the surface. Make sure you sharpen your own axe too. Don't, take care of yourself as well. Yes, sir.
Talking about the relationship between parents and children and each other. One of the things our parents always emphasized to us is that we were second in the relationship behind my mother and father. All of our lives, our parents said, look, we're going to take time to go away, we're going to take time to spend for ourselves. And I think it's a mistake that a lot of parents make of waiting 20, 25 years, putting their relationship on hold and not continuing to nurture and build that relationship. Then what happens is after 25 years, they don't know each other.
Right.
There's no, and the kids get the wrong idea. They don't see that in the biblical perspective. The one earthly relationship that is inseparable or should be.
Of what it can be.
Is the husband-wife relationship. It's the one relationship that needs to be prioritized. And so often we don't do that with our children because we want to give our children all these things, all the activities and everything else, instead of saying, hey, this is all you get because we've got to reserve time for Bible study and for ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Your happiness isn't the most important thing in the world. Happiness from that worldly perspective. Perfect. I appreciate it. All right, so I was going to read all these. I think we'll have to skip it. But when we think of our faith, I would submit, obviously, we think of our Sunday morning responsibility. In our culture, we meet on Sunday mornings instead of the afternoon, whatever it might be, the Sunday worship service. Outside of that, what does our faith, what does actually being a Christian consist of? So I found, doing good works, prayer, study, growing in knowledge and maturity. A Christian at 70 who has been a Christian for 50 years should not be the same that he was when he was 30. Or that would be a shame. That's the Word of God not working in that person because of that person's choosing. Thinking and dwelling, we talked a little bit earlier about that, of just when you find yourself just thinking What are you thinking about? Are you dwelling on noble and good things? And then also preaching and spreading of the gospel. Can anyone think of any others? When you think of being a Christian, what does that look like? Like your role, your works. Yes, sir.
When we think about faith as an outflowing of hearing God's word, it really applies to every part of our life. And something Laurie said earlier, this really resonates with me, which is that it's not so much that I've got my spiritual life and then I've got my secular life.
Yeah.
My life is my life. And if the overarching theme of my life is serving God, then everything I do, including when I'm busy with my kids' sports, or I'm busy at work, or I'm doing other activities, that I'm thinking and talking about the right kinds of things, and hopefully taking my kids along with me, as Laurie mentioned earlier, and involving them in the things that I'm doing that might be service-oriented or whatever, that I'm finding opportunities every day to talk about God, to serve other people, and really to glorify God in all aspects of life.
Absolutely. Totally, you took the words out of my mouth. It's great. All right. So a thought exercise. I like doing stuff like this. I'm sure this happens all the time, okay? So if a Christian acquaintance of yours ran into someone from another congregation and asked how your family's faith was, what would that person say? And think about it. In our culture, a lot of times we ask, like, hey, what do you do? You meet someone, is the first thing you say is, oh, are you a Christian? Oh, no, you don't want to be rude. You ask about what they do for a living, all this other stuff. I don't think that's where Paul would go. It's immediate faith. It's something spiritual. When this person asks about your family's faith, do they say, oh, well, he works a really stressful job. He's on the road all the time, but she tries hard. She brings the kids. Is it like that? Or is it, well, they're involved in, competitive volleyball and, she's really good. I think she's going to get a scholarship and go so-and-so and do all this. Or, is that what they talk about? What do they think of when they think of your family? Or is it they are exceptionally strong and growing in the faith, full of good works? Like, you look at a godly family, that's the family right there. And then for the men, if that's not the answer, why is that? What are we doing to make it to where that's not the answer? So again, something to think about. What are some indicators that our families may not be fully committed to our faith? I say fully committed, I'm not trying to be judgmental or anything, but what is it that maybe indicators that we might be drifting away from our faith or not fully in it? What do we think? Yes, sir. Pardon me? Okay, yeah, just one of the probably most obvious things is just attendance to the assembly. It's hard to be participating in worship service if you're simply not here. Right. Ben, sorry.
Well, each family has to really look at themselves in the mirror, but maybe a good starting place as well for couples would be how much mercy do we demonstrate? How much forgiveness do we practice, towards one another as husband and wives?
Yeah.
And our children will pick up on that. And I'll also add that, especially when it comes to our faith, sometimes people can say something about a family and they can just be totally off base.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
People can say something about a family and they can just be totally off base. I think another
Sure.
way to look at it too is, what do our children see in those unexpected moments where our faith is being tested? We don't have that opportunity to put on the mask or
Right.
be fully prepared for what may be coming, and that kind of response, right?
Yeah. And the reason I used that specific phrase about Paul is always commending. He's like, I've heard of your faith, and he's always commending them. That was kind of the genesis of that. So let me skip through this real fast. So men, hopefully we had some steel-toe shoes on tonight. Does God have special requirements for us? Or maybe, yeah, go ahead, Wade.
Yes, I'd say yes. A couple of years ago, I went back and I was just on my own trying to find verses that talk about
parents raising their children, and pretty much every verse I could find, it was father. I mean, it was both.
Mm-hmm.
Or it was fathers, like in Ephesians. There's very few verses where it's mom or wife. There's either both or it's father. So
Right.
I would definitely say yes.
And we look at the example of a godly woman and grandmother with Timothy and everything. So we don't want to downplay that. But again, men, like, let us always be looking at the godliness of our family, of our house, and are we taking it as serious as we need to? You mentioned Ephesians. Also, just thinking about it as far as the qualification of elders, in 1 Timothy 3, 4, and 5, one who rules his house well, having his children in submission with all reverence, for if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? That's something we should all be striving for. All right, 7:45 was my, don't look at that, sorry. 7:45 was when I wanted to get right here, so if I was rushing, I apologize. So, if you discover in a moment of contemplation, hey, maybe we're not where we need to be, what do I need to do? What recommendations would you give that person? Or what would you think? Not always. Sophia's not here tonight, so I just can't call on her. Ben.
Well, I would say probably have to stop everything, reevaluate everything, hit the alarm. We're being consumed by worldly pursuits. What action can we take? Probably need to have a good conversation as a family, and the man has to take that lead with that. What are we doing? Where are we going? And, what's going to have to change?
Yeah, it's a serious problem. If there is I don't want to bring up any negative feelings, but just to think about the severity of, if there is a cancer diagnosis, if someone were to tell you, hey, you have an aggressive type of cancer, what do you do? Well, you take it serious. You don't just, okay, well, I'll give it a year and see what it looks like. Like, no, you're going to specialists, you're getting tested, you're coming up with a plan right then to treat it as the problem that it is. And so when you encounter maybe not even sin, but an attitude that is not of God, it's something carnal, you need to treat it with the seriousness that it is. And so my recommendation here, and this is to cut sling load, all right? 101st guy, right? So cut sling load is an Army term. Okay, this is my third and last time, I promise, to talk about the military. So this is a sling load operation, okay? You got a Chinook helicopter right there, and it's carrying a large weight. All right, it's called a sling load. All right, and there's a point in time that everyone that is trained in this knows that if the load that you're carrying starts swirling around or gets twisted, something happens, wind picks up, whatever it might be, and it looks like it's going to bring the entire helicopter down, you give the signal to cut sling load. And there's a little button or a handle, you pull it, and it releases it. It releases that load to save the rest of the helicopter. Like, that's the primary goal, and you never ever lose sight of that. Yes, we want to get this load where it's going, but above everything else, we maintain our own safety. And that's what I would say is what we need to do. And there's another word for that that's biblical. It's repent. That's what we're talking about. Treat it like the seriousness that it is. So in my family, and there's no way y'all can read that, can you? Well, maybe. So this is something that we came up this week. I wanted to, I didn't think it'd be a good idea. Like, hey, is there anything that y'all have repented of here recently? It probably wouldn't go over well. But this is something that my family has encountered this last week. So there's this cool little app. It's called Duolingo, and it's for language learning, and it's pretty neat. It's like very cartoony. It's gamified. You can learn pretty much any language out there. And so my family got really into it. Noah was doing all kinds of stuff. I was 30 days in, had a 30-day streak going, when all of a sudden we got to a lesson on like possessive, I'm not an English major, I don't know, like his ball, like it's how to do that. The very first sentence was something about his husband. I was like, well, that's an odd thing to just throw in there, the very first one. Like, I get maybe, we need to learn that just conceptually for it, but this was the very first one. And then it just kept hammering it over and over and over. Her girlfriend, his husband, all this stuff. Like, what is going on here? And then so, being curious, I Googled it, and Duolingo has a blog, and it came up that one of their main initiatives was to normalize queerness in Duolingo stories, because it talks stories to kind of help you learn this language. And it says, since the beginning, our stories have included everyday depictions of LGBTQ life, even before we created, and it gives a list of these characters. It's been important for us to show queer people living their lives in an unsensualized and normal way, allowing LGBTQ characters to exist without specifically drawing attention to that identity. This is something we believe should be a best practice in storytelling. In order to normalize something, you simply present it as normal, which means you don't draw attention to it when depicting it. That's satanic. Like, think about that. They're saying, hey, what we want to do is normalize this type of behavior. We're going to teach your kids to think that it's normal. It don't even, like, it's just, Johnny has an apple. Johnny has a husband. Like, whatever it might be, it's those two things. Okay? So this was something that I got pretty mad about it, just because, like, this is, you would think it would be out in the open. You would know this. But I set Noah down, and we were talking about it. And, I didn't tell him, like, hey, delete that right now. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I would have, but we sat there and talked about it, and I was like, hey, what do you think? And he was like, well, this is only in these stories that it has. Do you think I can just maybe use it a little, like basically on the sides of this? I was like, well, here's the thing, buddy. They're telling you what their motives are. You're giving them access to your brain to help you learn this and to learn what's normal, and they're telling you exactly what their motives are, that they want to alter the way you think. I was like, do you think that's smart? And he was like, well, no, I don't guess. And he just deleted it. I mean, he was like on a 45-day streak. The kid loved it. Okay, he was putting in like over an hour a day learning this stuff, and he just deleted it. I was super proud of him. But that's the kind of thing, like, we have to help our kids understand how we go about making those decisions. So I don't know if there's any other examples that y'all can think of like that, but that's just something that we dealt this week on. So, yes, sir.
On television and
yeah.
Music for years now. I mean, we're going back before I was born. I mean, the music of the 50s, the stuff that we would listen to after, we'd hear the preacher say that the music of the day was bad and so on. I'm like, yeah, if you go way back in the 50s, you hear that kind of music and that kind of stuff. They were inserting immoral activities in that. But that's the way it's always been. That's the way the old devil works.
Yeah. Just make it normal. There's a story I wanted to tell a minute ago about how does the devil operate. And there's a saying in the Middle East, don't let the camel's nose under the tent. Has anybody ever heard that? Or am I just the only weird guy that has? Okay, I use that all the time. Don't let the camel's nose under the tent. What it is, on these cool Arabian nights, there's a tent, there's a Bedouin. He's in there all warmed up, and the camel looks at it, and he's like, man, that looks comfy. But he knows that he can't get his whole camel body in that tent. So what he does is he puts his nose under there. And the Bedouin looks at it, and he's like, well, whatever. And then just a little bit longer, he puts his whole head in. And he looks at it, and he's like, okay, whatever. And then before you know it, he's weaseled his way mostly in the tent. And that's what we have. Don't let the camel's nose in the tent. So it's kind of a humorous thing, but I use it all the time. So if we discover that our family has been consumed by worldly pursuits, Ben, you mentioned kind of taking care of business, taking it off. Some things that I was thinking about here, and this is the last slide, and we've got a little bit of time to talk. We can go back to another slide if we run out of time. But just some practical applications. Because again, I'm in this. My kids are wanting to do multiple sports. Like, this is a thing I feel I'm constantly being pulled to do. Dial back what you say yes to. You really kind of find out your values when you start saying no. Like, what's important to you? Yeah, that's what you say yes to, but you really also find out the opposite of what's not important when you can say no to it. And that's very powerful, I think. Limiting the obligations. If you're being asked to do all these volunteering things, those things are great, that's fine. But what are you neglecting from a godly perspective? And then learning to be content. Would y'all turn with me to 1 Peter 3? 1 Peter 3, verses 3 and 4. Excuse me, I'm in 2 Peter. 1 Peter 3, 3 and 4. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, and putting on fine apparel. And then here in verse 4, rather let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. And when we think specifically about our daughters, like what do we want? So I have a little girl. Like, what do I want her to become? When I think of her as being a 30-year-old woman, what do I want her to be? And my hope is this. Like, this is what it should be. Not, all the shirts that say, be strong, let them know you're there, whatever it is. Like, okay, sure. But are we content with allowing our daughters to be gentle and quiet? That type of spirit. Do we really believe that? Or do we think that that's somewhat maybe not, they're not living up to their full potential if they do that? That's a hard thing. I have a hard time sometimes because I get pulled into that. So any advice you think for men with daughters, is that accurate, you think?
You look at me,
I'm looking right at you, Stephen.
my daughters are grown and they're here.
Yeah.
So I think encouraging them to be godly women, and the decisions they make with regard to their careers and education and all those things, they all play into that. Their primary objective is to please God and their families, and whatever we can do to encourage that, not make them feel guilty or feel like there's some form of lesser than because they've chosen that, because the world tells everybody that.
Absolutely.
But if you as a father can encourage them and even demonstrate, if you can make that possible for your wife in some way, for them to demonstrate that, that's helpful. Yeah. If it's possible, some of it's not possible, but if it is, it can be helpful in that way. And then also encouraging them as they're actually in that activity. Don't think it doesn't cross their minds even after they've made the choice. After they've made those choices, encourage.
Right.
Thankful for you. I think you're doing a great job. Look at what you're accomplishing for the Lord. Look at your children. Look at the way your family is operating. Look at how is your husband pleased? Are you respecting him right now? All those things. They need more encouragement.
Right. Right, and they're powerful too. I think the women's class this week, was it Proverbs 31? Went over, I believe so. This isn't, a lady that's sitting in the corner, so timid and quiet, not saying anything. That Proverbs 31. These are two of the same thing. They're out there. They're active. They're making things happen. But this also describes them. Also, to get back on track, limit year-round responsibilities. I think Hugh might have talked about this. With kind of one sport at a time. Like, sports should have seasons, right? It's okay to take a break. It's okay to tell the pressing coach on the select team that he thinks that your daughter or son's going to fall so far behind that they're never going to get to the MLB if they don't do whatever. Like, okay, that's fine. Your priorities are not mine. That is okay. Doing good for others, and then taking your kids. I think Lori talked about that. Take your kids along. They're fine. Like, they'll be totally okay. If they're inside, I'm trying to do this more with doing yard work and more manual things, because I have a bad habit of just putting my headphones in and listening to a podcast or something. Like, don't do that. Have your kids come up there and pull weeds with you, and y'all can gripe about how hot it is together, and it's okay. And then finally, plan your lives around your faith and not your faith around your life. No, yeah, okay. Make sure I said that correctly. We should not, you look at the analogy that we've seen about, there's a huge jar and you have a bunch of rocks and you have sand. How do you get it to fit? You don't pour the sand and then put the rocks in. It's not going to fit. Put the rocks in, then you pour the sand in and it goes around it. That's how we need to look at our faith. This is what is important. If it's not, then we're hypocrites and we're going to do more harm than good with our kids. Our kids are going to look at it and they're going to be honest. They're going to see it and they're going to say, he's playing a game. Like, that's not how we need to be. We need to be real. Thank you so much for your time. Sorry to preach. We'll be back here next week. Thank you.